Welcome to Hot Shots Podcast, where we talk everything coffee. So grab yourself a cup, pour yourself a cup, and let's get started. So welcome. This is Chris with HotShotsCatering.com. I'm your host for the podcast, as usual. And today, I thought we'd talk about two items. One I wanted to cover real quickly, but really, I don't know how many of you guys really know this, but Starbucks has a tall. And as far as I know, many years ago, Starbucks had a tall, and a tall was actually considered at one point an 8-ounce drink. Many years ago, I believe. And someone can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. And then, the trend became bigger and bigger coffee-sized drinks. Well, there's an article by MASH that's interesting. It says, the Starbucks drink nobody orders but should. And one of the main arguments that they make is there's actually a 8-ounce drink, which I actually didn't know this. Maybe I did, but forgot. But there's an 8-ounce size drink. So a Starbucks tall is a 12-ounce. If you order a short, that is an 8-ounce drink. And so it's very interesting to read about this. And, traditionally, in Italy, when you ask for a latte means milk, so they give you milk. And if you want an espresso or anything like that, it's always kind of separate. At least that's how it's been explained to me. And so, they're talking about here is where more and more people should be getting a short one. You can actually have your coffee hotter. And be able to enjoy it a little bit longer because you have more of the espresso in there, heating it up. But also, that one is 30 cents cheaper than a tall, as well as you're getting closer to a traditional latte. Now, in that sense, I don't even know what that means because, like I said, in Italy, when you ask for a latte means milk. And you get a shot of espresso, and you can add the two together on your own, on your own terms. But in theory, yes, they're taking and creating a short, which in theory would have a better balance. I actually think, sometimes we do 8 ounces here at Hot Shots. I think 12 ounce is actually the premier size that you should be working with because it's just enough coffee. In my opinion, and it's also just enough of taste and balance and everything else. 8 ounce you can make a little bit too sweet. I think also the espresso, depending on what kind of espresso you're using, can overpower the drink as well, especially Starbucks. I haven't tried their short, but now that I read this, I probably will be doing so in the near future. But something I did want to talk about was actually decaf. Now, there was an article in here. I'm just looking for it. But there was an article in here by Self, which talks about the creation of decaf. And one of the main things that they mention, it says, turns out decaf coffee has caffeine, which feels like a betrayal. And so this article is very interesting to me. It's pretty detailed too. So if you didn't know this already, decaf isn't 100% decaffeinated coffee. So that doesn't mean that there's 100% no caffeine in a decaf cup of coffee. And a lot of people don't realize that. And why it's good to know that and why they're claiming it's a betrayal is partly in this article they explain is that when you get a cup of coffee and you ask for it to be decaf, some people might have reactions to caffeine that, one, they don't even know that they're having, or two, they know that they're having them, but they don't really understand why because the fact it actually is decaf. So some people are very, very caffeine sensitive, and basically throughout this article, they go through and they say, one, the FDA doesn't really regulate the caffeine that's going into decaf and all of that, but they've done measurements. It looked like Starbucks was one of the strongest, which I think had like a 15 milligrams of caffeine, and some of these other ones were a little bit less than that. But basically what neurologists in this article has said is that the caffeine, even though small traces of caffeine can still bring on migraines, can still bring about other issues. For instance, if you have insomnia, can also contribute to that. So some people, they just have to get off of caffeine completely, and drinking a decaf coffee does not cure that issue because there still is trace amounts of caffeine that could be big enough to in theory, cause a problem. What's interesting too is, if you didn't know this, how decaf is made. It's actually through a chemical process that I'm trying to find it here, but basically it goes through this kind of like a wash system. The beans go through this wash that actually utilizes various different chemicals that pulls and extracts the caffeine out of the coffee. And so it's just kind of interesting. You would think in a way you're adding, when you're drinking decaf now, you're not only adding other chemicals to the decaf process that could have trace amounts that go into your coffee, but that there actually is some caffeine in there too. So it's almost like a double whammy there, if you will. But I'm trying to see here what the actual chemicals were, because they stated on here different chemicals and things that that are used. But the FDA did some measurements here, and one of the things they said, as a general rule, the FDA has not objected to use the term decaffeinated on coffee if it's at least 97% of the original caffeine has been removed. So that's something that the FDA did. And their math has yielded that 8-ounce cups can typically contain, with caffeine, if you have caffeine, so not decaf, but if you have a caffeinated cup of coffee, could have 150 milligrams of caffeine prior to the decaf process. After that, you could have no more than 4.5 milligrams of caffeine. But like I said, they did one where Starbucks had 3 to 15.8 milligrams per shot of decaffeinated Starbucks espresso. So that's pretty interesting there as well. Just something that it's good to think about, and how much of this caffeine is actually in this coffee that we drink each day. There's methylene chloride is a carcinogen. That's one of the aspects that is used, one of the chemical processes that's used to remove this caffeine from the beans. And then I can't say this word, but ethyl acetate is generally recognized as safe by the FDA. So that's another chemical that they utilize to actually remove the caffeine. But ethyl acetate, I'm gonna have to practice that word. But anyways, those are the two main components. And then it says, other solvents are used during this method to draw out the caffeine, but they do say that you can never get 100% of the caffeine removed from beans. I don't think anyone's ever been successful with that, because there's always something going to be left. How big of the trace amounts is really based on how good is their process of removing it. And that's about it. How big of a deal is little caffeine actually is, and this is where I was talking to you about caffeine tolerance. Some people have various different attributes, I guess, or different ways to take caffeine. Some people take it, can take it, some people can't. So that's something else they talk about in this in a little bit more detail. But that's pretty much the main purpose of this article by Self. And I'll put it in the description here. But basically, decaf, couple takeaways. Decaf is not 100% decaf. And if you are someone who's sensitive to caffeine, I would still be careful of drinking any decaf, along with knowing the factors that decaf is a chemical process in order to remove the decaf coffee. So it's not something that's just, you know, in nature or something is grown decaffeinated. No, there's actually a process out there in which they actually take away the caffeination by a chemical process. So that's something interesting to know. Anyways, that's pretty much it. I just wanted to touch base with you guys with a simple podcast today. One talking about the Starbucks short coffee that you might not know about, but I would definitely try it. If you aren't familiar with that, I would definitely try it. And I would try some of your favorite lattes or favorite drinks that you have tried in the past in a 12 ounce, in a tall or in a grande or something like that. Try it in a short this week and just see what you think. I'd be surprised to see how many baristas are able to make the drinks in that size, because you will have the espresso, and the espresso is going to be a good size, not all that size, but it's going to be a couple, an ounce and a half to maybe 2-3 ounces in some cases of espresso in there. You shouldn't have 3, but you might find out that the espresso, like I said, when I've done it, when we've done it at Hot Shots and we do it, it turns out great because we know how to measure what we're doing. But other companies and other places out there, when they don't do it a lot, or if it's not highly requested, they tend to kind of, probably more than likely, in my opinion, they'll probably make it stronger. So if you do want a stronger tasting espresso or latte with espresso, 8 ounce would be great. And so that's where that short would come in. If you want something that's less, obviously then, go with a grande or bigger. And then the decaf is the other aspect of this podcast. Is most of you guys out there probably don't know much about decaf, and decaf is something that it does not mean that it's 100% decaffeinated, so always remember that. And other than that, you guys have a great rest of your day. Here at Hot Shots, if you don't know who we are the gourmet coffee caterer, premier gourmet coffee caterer in the DFW Metroplex. And if you ever want to check us out, go to hotshotscatering.com. You can find all of our information, everything there. But other than that, I'm going to bid you guys adieu. And I appreciate you guys listening to the podcast, and we will talk to you next time.